Hello, I am Kyatric and today I'm making this video for the Construct 2 Academy. Construct 2 is a visual editor with visual event sheet that allows you to make games. You visually design the layout, the screen for your game. Determine the interactions between the objects of your project in the event sheet to determine the logic of your game. Add-ons, plugins and behaviors may have visual representation in the editor, like the sprite right there, on screen, and will be controlled through the event sheets. Some plugins' behaviors come with built-in interactions you don't need to add through event sheets. For example, our player object right there does have the behavior 8 direction, which makes that we can control the player object on the screen at runtime with the keyboard, and it has collisions and it will be moving on the screen. Although, if you want finer control over those interactions and your game's logic, you have to know and use the events sheet. What are add-ons? They are base objects to add to your project in order to program it. Each add-on has its own properties in the property bar, features and functionalities. For example, the player object is an object type sprite that is to display frames, images, and can have behaviors added to it that will allow your player to control and populate the world and your game. Add-ons are either plugins, object types, or behaviors. Plugins are elements of the project that can have a visual representation on screen or in the layout. The sprite object type, the text object type, for example, are plugins. The keyboard is as well, but doesn't have a visual representation. They are considered main building blocks for your project. Behaviors, on the other hand, are elements you add to a plugin to give it more functionalities and possible interactions. As mentioned, our player sprite object does have a behavior platform, as you can see here, that will add some features to it. It will interact with all the objects that do have the solid behavior and allow your player to control the object and have it behaving like the character of a platform game. Another example is the sign behavior for this platform that will make it move horizontally directly without adding anything to our event sheet. How to add a plugin to your project? One way is to double-click the layout, which will bring this Insert New Object dialog. Another way is to right-click the layout, Insert New Object, or finally right-click the Object Types folder into the project bar, Insert New Objects. Then in the list, select the object type you want to add and click Insert. Your mouse cursor has changed and you can see the name of the layer the plugin will be added to. Click, and finally your object is added to your project. Some plugins may have several instances, whereas other plugins are considered global to the project. An example: if you add the keyboard object to your project, it doesn't have a visual representation, and it can be accessed from any layout. You can see that the properties are pretty small, and you can't generally add a behavior to such a plugin. It is important to make the difference between the object types and the instances. Object types define a class of an object. For example, fighter enemy and bug eye enemy are different object types, both sprite plugin. They have different animations and representations, and events can be applied separately to make them look and act differently, despite the fact they are both sprite plugins. On the other hand, instances using the previous example are objects in a layout. We do now have 4 fighter enemy instances. There is still only one fighter enemy object type, no matter how many instances are created. Instances all share the events and, in the case of the sprite plugin, the same artwork for the object type fighter enemy. Similarly, there could be multiple instances of the bug eye enemy object type. Hold down the Control key and drag-drop the object to make new instances. As can be seen in the Construct2 manual over at Skyra's website, plugins do share common features. The manual is an essential resource when programming and making new games. Always keep it at hand and always go and look at the elements it will propose as well as the explanations it can give. When dealing with a new type of plugin or behavior, always be sure to go and see what the manual has to say about its properties, its conditions, actions, and expressions. It's the toolbox you need to know. As far as common properties goes for plugins, you can see them in the properties bar. There is the name of the object type that is relevant to your project. Changing the names often allows you to be sure about what you are expecting from your object and what their purpose is in your project. Plugin there is the type of object, in this case a sprite. As we've seen earlier, we can have about any of this list. The UID, you may have caught a glimpse about it in the manual, is an identifier that is unique to the instance and the object that you are selecting, and can be used through events to make sure that you are applying your actions to this specific instance. As this identifier number is unique, there is no chance into a project that 2 different instances share the same UID. It's a good way to be sure you are selecting or picking one and only one instance. IIDs or index IDs are identifiers of the same ID but that apply only to the instance of a specific object type. For each object type, the list is reset, so you can have two different instances of two several object types in your project that share the same IID, to be sure you are really picking only a specific instance, prefer as often as possible to go with UIDs. You are sure that it is the very specific instance that you are selecting. The global property allows you to make that instance not being destroyed from a layout to another. This can allow you to have some instances going from a layout to another throughout a project without having to create or destroy instances on start of your layout. You do have the layer inside of the current layout to which the instance belongs. You can have the angle of the object. 0 means that it's always facing to the right, so 90 makes it rotate to a right angle. Opacity, kind of in the name, allows you to modify the opacity, the visual opacity of the object. 100 being the maximum, 0 meaning it's invisible. You can see the X and Y position in the layout. X is about the horizontal position. It starts with 0 in the top left corner of your layout, and the Y position is in the height. It starts with the 0 as well, and the more you go down, the bigger Y is. So for this instance, the X is 139 and the Y is 127. And if we take this instance, the X is 319 and the Y is 436. The size then is the width and height of the object itself. For now it's 128 pixels, and if we modify it, you can directly see in the layout the modification and the new size. Instance variables are values and variables that can be applied to the whole object type. If I create one, I can add it. Let's call it order. It has a type and an initial value, and you can see that now all of our instances do have the order variable. It's an instance variable, which means that the value can depend on each instances. Let's consider that this instance will have the value 0, this one will have the value 1, this one will have the value 2, and this one will have the value 3. Now all of our instances keep their value, and if we select the object type itself, you can notice that the order is set to blank, and if we go back, the initial values varies. If I were to modify there, let's say 19, now all my instances do share the same value, which may be useful and sometimes may not. Currently, if I preview my project, I would have only 5 images fixed and doing nothing. There is no interactions. I have set nothing in my event sheet, and my objects and instances currently don't have a behavior. So, first question, What is a behavior? Behaviors are elements you add to a plugin to give it more functionalities. How to add a behavior to a plugin? In the properties of our instance and object type, we do have a behaviors property. Add edit and a link. Click the link. It opens a new dialog. Click the little plus, add new. It opens a new dialog that contains all the current behaviors that are installed on your computer. For this example, we will add an 8 direction behavior, and when you click, the behavior is added to all the instances and to the object type itself. As we have seen with the instance variables earlier, if you modify the properties of the object type itself, all the instances will do have the same values. So for example, let's modify the acceleration to 400 and check out that each instance do now have the acceleration of 400. And very much like the instance variables and other properties, if I modify it only for a single instance, only this instance will do have this value. So I've modified the direction so that this instance can only move up and down, whereas the others will be able to move in the 8 directions. And when we run our layout for a preview and use the keys of our keyboard, the right and left key do move 2 instances, and now up and down do move all the instances, since remember, our left instance right there can only move up and down as per the properties of its behavior. As for the plugins, the behaviors do have their own reference and are listed in the manual, and each behavior do have its own properties, conditions and actions that you can read about in the manual. Once again, the manual is an important resource to keep at hand as much as possible and refer to as often as possible. Another common property is the effects. You can see right up that we have 2 properties, the blend mode and the possibility to add edit effects. As for the behaviors and instance variables, clicking the effects link will open a new dialog. Clicking the plus add new will open yet another dialog in which all the effects are currently stored. Select the effect that you want to add to your object type, click add, and you can see that some of those effects do have properties that you can modify. Here the radius, for example, let's apply a 16. You can see that it has modified for this very instance. Again, select the object type, modify it to 45, and now all our instances do have the same radius. As you can see, you can directly, without closing the dialog, modify some of the properties to see if the effects do apply for what you are willing to do. It's important to note that those effects rely on WebGL. If the browser you are executing your game in, or even if in the editor you can't see the effect directly applying, you might have to update your graphic card drivers, and if in your browser there are issues, try to make an update of your browser or make sure that it does support WebGL. A lot more information may be found in the manual when you go into the project primitives, objects, effects, article. From there you can see about the support of the WebGL, a full explanation of what the blend mode is, knowing that the blend mode will work no matter what. It's not specific to WebGL and it's used as fallback. When WebGL is not supported in your browser, you can still modify the blend mode for your object. And more about the fallbacks, testing, effects at runtime, and the performance. Reading the whole article is really critical when using and dealing with the effects. The effects can also be applied directly to a layout. You can see in the properties of the layout effects, and to a specific layer as well, which allows to have a more specific and more globalized effect applied to all the objects and the whole layer and layout itself. A container is a way to link object types together. For example, there we do have our object type tank, which is of a plugin sprite that does contain a behavior destroy outside of layout, which means that whenever the instance is outside of the boundaries of the layout, the instance will be destroyed automatically without us having to do anything in the event sheet. It does contain different object types. It does contain the turret, which is yet another sprite, but it also contains the progress bar and the TXT tank. The progress bar is a plugin of its own set, and the text is yet another plugin as well. The fact that those object type, different object type are contained, means that whenever I am creating an instance of any of those object type, the other will have an instance created as well. I'm clicking anywhere on the screen and it creates a bunch of new instances. As you can see, the UID refers to the one of the newly created tank, and I do have 4 instances created each time, and so I have increments of 4 in between the UIDs, and I have a random angle and a random value. I've created an on a touch, which is an input plugin that is either the mouse or touch on a mobile device. When I touch anywhere on the screen, it will create a new instance of the object type tank, and it will, without me having to say it, create a new instance of the turret object, TXT tank, and progress bar as well. And moreover, since those objects are contained, whenever I'm referring to a specific instance, in that case the newly tank instance created, when I'm referring to the other object types, it considers I'm referring to the instances of those object types that were created as well. So in that case, the newly created turret will be set to the position of the newly created instance of the tank object at the image point 1, and the turret angle will be set randomly to a certain angle. The TXT tank object will have its position, and this new instance will have its position set to the newly created tank instance, and it will also have its own text set to the tank UID of the newly created instance. And finally, the newly instance of the progress bar that has been created will be set to the position of the newly created instance of the tank object type, and the progress bar progress will be randomly set between 0 and 100. And all that with one event and without having each time to refer specifically to the newly created instances of the objects. And whenever I will be picking an instance of a contain object, if ever I'm referring, like in my code there, to any, like if in the condition I'm picking a very specific instance of the tank object, for example, and yet I apply actions to turret, progress bar, txt tank, it will only apply those to the instance that are contained with or to the instance of the tank object that has been selected at the moment. It's a bit high concept, but it's a pretty useful feature, and sometimes when you have to make some kind of logic object that is created of several object types, it's pretty useful. Another thing to note is that the container feature is only available in paid versions of Construct 2. The free version does not allow you to use the container feature. This does conclude our broad look at the add-ons in Construct 2. I hope you have enjoyed this video. Don't hesitate to check out some of the other Construct 2 Academy material. Thank you for watching.